Hello, I'm Erin Somerville at McCallum High School, and I am briefly going over executive orders. What you have here is the definition. It's a rule or order issued by the President to an executive branch of the government and having the force of law. Presidents can issue executive orders, and so can governors, since they are the chief executives in their states. So it is difficult to find information on executive orders that doesn't have some bias. And there's a good reason for that. We understand that the president gets to be chief executive. But what we don't understand always or agree on is what that means. Here's the wording in Article 2 for the president. In Article 2, it says, the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America, and later it says he shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. So there's not much specificity, and presidents in the past have used executive orders with more and more frequency, and often the use of executive order is actually mundane and not that interesting, and then sometimes it can be really controversial because when the president issues an executive order, it feels like he's making a law. We'll talk about how technically he might not be making a law, but it feels like he's making a law, and that is a power reserved to the legislative branch. And there are some famous, executive orders in history. Truman used executive order to desegregate the armed forces, and it took a while. It didn't go into full effect overnight everywhere, but through executive order, he codified that the armed forces should be desegregated. And then when we look at school desegregation, it required Eisenhower, through executive order, commanding the National Guard to enforce school desegregation. And then an example of maybe something more mundane, doesn't mean it's not important, but it doesn't necessarily get everyone's attention. Obama has recently issued an executive order to provide more options for students to repay their student loans. So different plans offered for dealing with student debt. Okay, what I want to do is give you a local example of executive power so you can kind of understand where that comes from. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through an example here in Austin of how executive power can in effect feel sometimes like it is making laws, even though it doesn't technically have legislative power. So APD, they don't get to write the laws. Ordinances are passed by City Council, like the hands-free ordinance. Now you can't be talking on your phone while driving. And the state can pass law. And your county can have law. But APD, it's up to them to enforce those laws. They don't get to write the laws. But the police chief does have the power to direct his officers. And the officers have a lot of discretion. Police officers can't pull you over for every traffic violation. They just simply see too many, and there's too few of them. So we have, limited time, limited manpower, limited resources. So police officers don't pull everyone over for everything. They simply can't. And it's through that discretion, what they're choosing to focus on, what they're not going to focus on, that it might feel like laws are being made or ignored. So here's what I mean. Art Acevedo recently told his police officers, we need to crack down on blocking the box. Austin's got a big traffic problem, and there are people who are entering the intersections, and the lights are turning red before they can clear the intersection. So when they enter that intersection and can't get out of the intersection, they're now blocking traffic, perpendicular traffic, creating even more traffic. So it's always been a law that you can't block the box. When you enter an intersection, you can only lawfully enter it if you know that you can exit it before the light turns red. So Police Chief Art Acevedo told his officers, look, this is what you're going to crack down on. And so what the officers hear is when they're out doing their job, they're in their vehicles, maybe stopped at a light, and they see someone going 5 miles over the speed limit, someone else rolls through a stop, and someone else is blocking the box. This tells them they should go after the person blocking the box. And that means they're going to have to let the person who did a rolling stop go. and they're going to have to let the person who's speeding a little bit go. So law enforcement, any kind of law enforcement, has a good amount of discretion over what laws to enforce, when to enforce them, how to enforce them, and on whom they're going to be enforced. A police officer ultimately has the deciding power if they're going to give you a warning or a ticket. So it's important to understand that when it comes to enforcing the law, this might be why we need to hope that the president can faithfully execute the law, or that APD will faithfully execute the law, because we know they're going to be faced with many decisions and limited resources. So they're going to have to use their judgment on what to do with this executive power that is faithfully carrying out the law. Okay, so let's talk about, I hope this analogy set in, let's talk about Obama. He's issued a lot of executive orders. Maybe by the end of the presidency it will be as many as former President Bush or Clinton, but right now he still has fewer than them. And this is January of 2016. So he recently issued immigration reform through executive order. And it was a really big executive order. There's some video clips about that to follow. And so in that, there was something called deferred action. You'll hear it often as DACA. And deferred action refers to him deferring deportment, like putting it off for people. He, as chief executive, does have the power to deport people from this country who are not legally here. Of course, he can't deport a citizen, but anyone who doesn't have legal status here, he could deport. And his nickname has been Chief Deporter because he's deported more people than previous presidents had. But like a police officer issuing a ticket or a warning, he can decide who he's going to deport, what kinds of people to deport, what people he won't deport. He can't give them citizenship. That's what Congress does. Congress can make the laws that might grant citizenship or create a pathway to citizenship. So through deferred action, essentially the president is promising to not deport certain individuals who meet certain requirements. The criticism is that we generally accept Congress has the power over immigration law, and that the president is overstepping his boundaries. And he often said before passing this that he wouldn't do it through executive order because it is really in the realm of what Congress should be dealing with. Nevertheless, he has passed an executive order. And at this time, the Supreme Court just a day or two ago said that they were going to take a case on immigration reform. So I'll have videos to update this as they come. And he also recently passed an executive order over gun control. And it's still too recent for me to really report on that, but there will be more video clips to come as that executive order unfolds. So one other note about executive orders. The president is doing something that can feel like a law, but there's an important distinction about what makes it not a law. And that is that when he passes the executive order, it can feel like a law during his term. The next president, however, doesn't have to keep that going. The next president, kind of like the next police chief, can tell his officers or his agents below him, we're going to do something else. We're going to focus on different laws to enforce, and we're going to enforce them in a different way. So when the president issues an executive order, the following question comes to its how it can endure. Okay, so most often when a president comes into office, that president will uphold a previous president's executive order and not just simply throw it out and do something new. But there's always that option. Whereas if something like immigration reform or gun control was actually passed through Congress, was actual legislation passed through Congress, then it would have more permanency from another executive order. Okay, so below are just more clips on executive orders from other people or organizations. Mind you, it's really difficult to ever get an unbiased report of an executive order. What I can tell you in the best way to explain why that is when a president uses an executive order, he's using a lot of power. And I would say that Republicans don't like when a Democratic president does that. And Democrats aren't necessarily happy when a Republican president does that. So executive orders often bring out the politics. It's sort of similar to debating congressional power. And you have your two schools of thought. Strict and liberal constructionists would argue that Congress should be either limited in its use of the elastic clause or more liberal with its use of the elastic clause. But I wouldn't say that parties tend to fall cleanly on one side or the other, but rather the Democrats will favor executive orders when it benefits them and their constituents, just like the Republicans will favor executive orders when it benefits them and their constituents. Okay. All right, so that's it.